Michael had always been a man of ambition. At just 32, he had already climbed the corporate ladder to become a senior banker at one of Lagos's top financial institutions. His colleagues admired him for his intellect, work ethic, and charm, but those closest to him knew his flaws, his stubbornness, his inability to apologize, and his habit of keeping malice whenever he was upset. Despite his impressive achievements, Michael was not one to boast. He was charismatic, yet distant, kind, yet emotionally reserved. His faith in God was present, but not passionate. He attended church out of obligation rather than devotion. And then he met Juliet. She was beautiful, kind-hearted, and deeply rooted in her faith. Her presence was calming, and her voice, soft yet firm, had a way of cutting through his walls. Their connection was instant, a spark that ignited a whirlwind romance. Michael had never believed in love at first sight, but Juliet changed that. They met after a Sunday service at their church's coffee corner. Juliet had just finished singing in the choir, her angelic voice still lingering in the air. Michael, who rarely stayed behind for fellowship, had been drawn to her. "Excuse me," he said, offering a hesitant smile. "I just wanted to say, you have an amazing voice." Juliet turned, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, thank you. I sing for God." Michael chuckled. "Well, God must be really impressed." She laughed, and that sound, light and full of warmth, would stay with him forever. What started as small talk soon turned into something deeper. They talked about everything: faith, careers, aspirations, and childhood memories. Michael found himself drawn to her unwavering faith, her ability to find joy in the smallest things, and the way she could turn any space into a place of light. Over the next few months, their romance grew. They went on dates at cozy restaurants, took walks on the beach, and spent Sundays attending service together. Their love story felt perfect, almost too perfect. But Juliet noticed something about Michael that troubled her. Whenever they disagreed, he would shut down. Rather than addressing the issue, he would withdraw into silence, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. She knew she had to address it before they took things further. One evening, as they sat on Juliet's balcony watching the city lights, she turned to him, concern in her eyes. "Michael," she began gently, "I've noticed something about you." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What's that?" She hesitated before speaking. "You don't like to talk when you're upset. You keep things bottled up. I've seen it a few times now. I just want to understand why." Michael exhaled, rubbing his palms together. "It's just how I am. Talking about it doesn't change anything. I'd rather let it pass." Juliet frowned. "But it doesn't pass. You distance yourself, and it makes the people around you feel like they've done something wrong, even when they haven't." He shrugged. "It's better than saying something I'll regret." "No, Michael," Juliet said softly. "The real regret comes from not saying anything at all." He didn't respond. He knew she was right, but admitting it felt too much like surrender. Juliet sighed. "I love you, and I want us to always talk through things. Please, let's promise that no matter what happens, we won't go to bed angry." Michael looked into her hopeful eyes, and against his better judgment, he nodded. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he could change. A year later, they stood before the altar, exchanging vows in front of family, friends, and God. The wedding was a dream come true, a perfect day filled with love, laughter, and the promise of forever. As Michael looked into Juliet's eyes, he truly believed that nothing could ever come between them. He was wrong. The honeymoon phase passed quickly. At first, their marriage seemed blissful, dinners together, long conversations, and shared dreams. But soon, Michael's old habit of keeping malice crept into their union. The first time it happened, Juliet had forgotten to call him after an outing with her friends. When she arrived home late, She apologized, but Michael didn't respond. Instead, he gave her the silent treatment for the rest of the night. Juliet sighed. "Michael, please. I said I was sorry. Why aren't you talking to me?" Michael remained silent, scrolling on his phone. She sat beside him, frustrated. "Are you really going to do this?" Still, no response. "Michael, we promised we wouldn't go to bed angry," she reminded him. He got up and walked to the guest room, shutting the door behind him. Juliet sat in stunned silence. It had begun. Over the months, the same cycle played out. Minor disagreements turned into long periods of silence. Juliet would try to talk things out, but Michael's ego wouldn't let him engage. He was not cruel. He was not abusive. But his silence was a form of punishment, and Juliet felt it deeply. One night, after a disagreement over something trivial, Michael refused to speak to her for 3 days. Juliet cried alone in their bedroom. This wasn't the marriage she had dreamed of. Juliet tried again. One evening, she prepared his favorite meal, jollof rice with grilled chicken. She set the table and waited for him to come home. When he entered the house, she greeted him warmly. "Michael, can we talk?" Michael exhaled. "About what?" "About us." He sat down reluctantly. "Juliet, I don't see the big deal. I just need time when I'm upset." "But it's not just time," she said softly. "You shut me out. Completely. It makes me feel like I don't exist to you." Michael frowned but said nothing. "Please," Juliet continued, "let's work on this together. I love you." Michael looked at her, something flickering in his expression. For a moment, she thought he would change, but instead, he sighed. "I don't want to fight." And just like that, the conversation ended before it even began. Juliet began to feel like a stranger in her own home. She tried everything, kindness, patience, even silence of her own, but nothing broke through Michael's emotional wall. She prayed fervently, asking God to touch her husband's heart. But night after night, she lay beside him in bed, feeling lonelier than she had ever been. Michael, on the other hand, was oblivious to the depth of her pain. He convinced himself that she was being dramatic. To him, silence was peace, not punishment. Until one fateful night, when silence became the deadliest mistake he would ever make. The tension in their marriage had reached an unbearable peak. Juliet no longer tried to initiate conversations after disagreements. She had grown weary of begging for communication, of feeling invisible in her own home. That night, they had another petty argument, one so insignificant that in hindsight, Michael wouldn't even remember what started it. But the silence that followed would be unforgettable. Juliet sighed deeply, her frustration mounting. "Michael, are we really doing this again?" Michael, reclining on the living room couch, didn't respond. His eyes remained glued to the television screen. Juliet walked closer, standing between him and the screen. "Michael, please. I know you're upset, but can we talk?" He exhaled sharply, annoyance flickering across his face. "Juliet, I don't feel like talking. Just let me be." Juliet shook her head, tears of exhaustion welling in her eyes. "I'm tired, Michael. Tired of feeling like a stranger in my own home. If this is marriage, then maybe—" She paused, swallowing the painful words threatening to escape. Michael scoffed, cutting her off. "Maybe what? You want to leave?" She clenched her fists. "I want my husband back. The one who loved me enough to speak to me, not this version of you that acts like I don't exist." His jaw tightened. He hated being confronted. He hated that she was making a big deal out of something that, to him, was nothing. "Juliet, I don't have the energy for this." He stood abruptly and grabbed a pillow. "I'm sleeping downstairs." Her eyes widened. "Michael." But he was already walking away. She closed her eyes, taking deep, shaky breaths. A sharp tightness formed in her chest, but she dismissed it. Not tonight. Juliet lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her chest tightening with every breath. She had felt this before, but never this bad. She reached for her inhaler, the one she always kept close, and pressed it to her lips. Nothing. Panic set in. The inhaler had run out. Her heartbeat accelerated. She needed the spare inhaler, the one in the kitchen cabinet downstairs. She reached for her phone, her hands trembling. She dialed Michael. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Downstairs, Michael sat on the couch, the glow of the TV illuminating his face. He saw her name flashing on his screen and sighed. "Why is she calling me?" he muttered. "She knows where to find me." He let the phone ring out, a second call, then a third. He rolled his eyes. She probably just wants to argue some more. Ignoring the call, he grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. Upstairs, Juliet tried calling again. Her vision blurred as her oxygen levels dropped. She staggered towards the door, each step feeling like she was wading through water. Her lungs screamed for air. She collapsed. Michael woke up feeling smug, convinced that Juliet would come downstairs and apologize. He stretched, letting out a long yawn, and walked toward the kitchen to get coffee before work. Something felt off. The house was too quiet. His brows furrowed. Juliet was usually up before him, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. He climbed the stairs, pushing their bedroom door open, ready to continue their Cold War. But what he saw stopped his heart. Juliet lay on the floor, motionless. For a moment he couldn't process what he was seeing. Then, as if waking from a trance, he sprinted to her side. "Juliet!" He shook her gently. "Juliet, wake up!" No response. His eyes darted around and landed on her empty inhaler beside her. His breath caught in his throat. His phone. The missed calls. His hands trembled as he lifted her into his arms. She was limp. Cold. God, no, please, no. He ran down the stairs, nearly tripping over himself, fumbling with his car keys as he rushed her to the hospital. The emergency room doors burst open as Michael carried Juliet inside. "Help me! Please! Someone help!" His voice was desperate, frantic. A team of doctors and nurses rushed to them. They placed Juliet on a gurney and wheeled her away. Michael's heart pounded loudly in his ears. He tried to follow, but a nurse held him back. "Sir, please wait here." He could barely breathe, his hands clenched into fists. His heart screamed at him to do something. Minutes felt like hours. Then, a doctor walked toward him. The look on his face said it all. Michael stood, his knees shaking. "Tell me she's okay," he whispered. The doctor sighed. "I'm sorry, sir. We did everything we could, but she was gone before she arrived." Michael felt the world tilt beneath him. "No, no, no, no." He staggered backward, shaking his head violently. "You're lying." "Sir, no!" Michael's scream pierced the air. His legs gave out. He collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest, his own breath ragged and painful. The nurse tried to console him, but he pushed her away. His mind reeled back to the night before, to the missed calls, to his own cruelty. She was calling me for help, and he had ignored her. He had let his wife die. Michael sat in the hospital corridor, staring at his hands. The same hands that had refused to pick up the phone. His mother arrived, tears streaming down her face. "Michael, what happened?" He couldn't answer. Hours later, he stood at Juliet's bedside, staring at her lifeless form. He wanted to wake up from this nightmare. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." But no apology would bring her back. The day of the funeral, rain poured heavily, as if the heavens were mourning with him. Michael sat motionless, his eyes empty. The choir sang softly, a song Juliet had once led. Her coffin was lowered into the ground, and reality shattered him. He let out a choked sob, his body shaking as he whispered, "I killed her." His mother grabbed his arm. "Michael, don't say that." But he knew the truth. He had let his anger, his ego, his pride rob him of the love of his life, and he would never forgive himself. Michael couldn't move from his seat even after everyone else had left the gravesite. His hands trembled, his heart felt like it had been ripped from his chest, and his mind refused to accept the reality before him. The finality of Juliet's death weighed on him like an unbearable burden. He replayed the night over and over. If he had just answered the phone, if he had just walked up the stairs, if he had just swallowed his pride, Juliet would still be here. His mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Michael, we need to go home." But where was home now? The house where he had ignored her calls? The bedroom where she had taken her last breath? The very thought made him nauseous. "I can't," he whispered. "Son, you have to," his mother said gently. "Juliet wouldn't want you to punish yourself." Michael let out a bitter laugh, his eyes wet with grief. "That's exactly what I deserve." Stepping into their home was like stepping into a tomb. The air was heavy with silence, suffocating in its stillness. Her perfume still lingered in the bedroom, her shoes neatly placed by the door, her favorite mug sitting by the sink. Everything about the house screamed Juliet. Michael stood in the doorway of their bedroom, his chest tightening. He saw the spot on the floor where he had found her, lifeless and alone. Tears blurred his vision as he sank to his knees. He sobbed, loud, gut-wrenching sobs that racked his entire body. "Juliet, I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." But the walls did not respond. The house did not comfort him. He was alone. Days turned into weeks. Michael stopped going to work. He barely ate. He shut out the world, drowning in the crushing weight of his guilt. One evening, while sorting through Juliet's belongings, he found an envelope tucked inside her bedside drawer. His hands trembled as he picked it up. "To my love, Michael." His breath hitched. A letter. He hesitated before opening it, afraid of what she might have written. But as his eyes scanned her familiar handwriting, he felt his heart break all over again. "My love, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. And though the thought breaks my heart, I need you to know something. I have always loved you, even in the moments when you pulled away, even in the silence, even when you refused to talk to me. My love for you never wavered, not even for a second. But Michael, love should never be silent. Love should be spoken, love should be heard, love should be shared. I wish you had seen that sooner. Promise me you won't let this break you. Promise me you'll forgive yourself. Live, my love. Not in regret, but in purpose. Always yours, Juliet." Michael clutched the letter to his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. She had forgiven him before he even knew he needed forgiveness. But could he ever forgive himself? Michael didn't know where to start, but he knew he couldn't continue like this. He found himself at Juliet's parents' home, his hands shaking as he knocked on the door. When her mother opened it, her eyes were filled with pain, but also with something worse: disappointment. His voice cracked. "I don't know what to say." Juliet's father stepped forward, his gaze cold and heavy. "Say what, Michael? That you ignored our daughter's cries for help? That she died alone while you sat downstairs?" Michael flinched as if he'd been struck. "I would give my life to take that night back." "But you can't," her mother whispered, tears running down her face. "She's gone." Michael fell to his knees, sobbing. "I loved her. I swear I loved her." Her father exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "Then honor her, Michael. Don't let her death be in vain." Michael had always thought he was a man of faith, but now, standing in an empty church, he realized how shallow his faith had been. He sank to his knees at the altar, hands clasped tightly. God, I don't deserve forgiveness, but if you're listening, if you can hear me, please, please help me. For the first time in his life, he truly prayed, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of something beyond the pain. Michael knew he could never undo what happened, but he could use his pain to prevent others from making the same mistake. He began speaking at couples' retreats, marriage seminars, and relationship counseling sessions. Each time he stepped onto the stage, he felt a lump in his throat, but he forced himself to speak for Juliet, for himself, for every couple who still had a chance. At one such event, he stood before a room filled with husbands and wives, some holding hands, some looking distant, all listening intently. I lost my wife because of silence, Michael began, his voice steady but heavy. Not because of abuse, not because of betrayal, but because of a lack of communication. I let my pride stop me from having the conversations that could have saved our marriage and her life. The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. I ignored her calls that night, thinking she wanted to argue. I thought my silence was strength, but it wasn't. It was a weapon, and I wielded it carelessly. And when I finally walked into our bedroom, I found her on the floor, lifeless. A few women in the audience wiped away tears. Some men looked down, visibly shaken. Michael took a deep breath. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't let silence steal the people you love. Talk to each other. Apologize even when it's hard. Say I love you more than you think you need to. Because one day, you may not get another chance. A couple in the front row who had been sitting stiffly apart reached for each other's hands. Others nodded, processing his words. As Michael stepped down from the stage, a man approached him, his voice shaking. Thank you. I haven't spoken to my wife in days over something stupid. Tonight, I'm going home to fix it. Michael nodded, his heart aching, but also full of purpose. Juliet's voice echoed in his mind. Love should never be silent. And for the rest of his life, he would make sure it never was again. The end. Hello, beautiful people. Thank you so much for your incredible support. Your time, your likes, your comments, and your shares mean the world to me. Every interaction fuels my passion for storytelling and keeps this journey alive. But to keep bringing you more amazing stories, I need your continued support. Please like, share, and drop your wonderful comments below. They encourage me more than you know. And most importantly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your subscription is what truly helps this channel grow and keeps the stories coming. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. I appreciate you.
Running